Welcome to the Weird and Unexplained with John. I am your host, John. Tonight we're heading to a quiet little town in southwestern Iowa, a place that on paper looks like any other Midwestern farm community. Neighbors know each other, kids ride their bikes down Main Street, church on Sunday, supper at 6. You know the vibe. But in June of 1912, something walked into that sense of safety and absolutely shattered it. This is the story of the Villisca Axe Murders. Imagine this. It's a warm Sunday night, June 9th, 1912, in the town of Villisca, Iowa. The local Presbyterian church has just wrapped up its Children's Day program. Kids are tired, but buzzing from the excitement. Parents are chatting on the lawn, and gas lamps are flickering to life along streets as people headed home. Among them is a well known family in town, Josiah and Sarah Moore. Their four kids, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, often called Arthur, and little Paul, and two young girls who are spending the night as guests, Ina and Lena Stillinger. 8 people, all heading back to a white 2-story house on a quiet residential street. But by the next morning, none of them will be alive. Let's walk into that house for just a second. The Moore home sits just off the main road, simple and modest. If you saw it today without context, you'd never guess what happened there. It looks like any other early 1900s family home: wooden frame, small yard, close neighbors. The kind of place where you'd expect to smell coffee in the morning and hear kids running around the kitchen. But that Sunday night, the Moores and the Stillinger sisters get home late from church. They probably had a little snack, maybe talked over the program, and then everyone settled into bed. The parents in their room upstairs, the kids in their rooms, and the Stillinger girls in the guest room downstairs. Doors locked, lights are out, a normal night in a small Iowa town. At least, that's how it should have gone. Because while everyone was drifting off to sleep, someone else might have already been inside the house. One of the most chilling details about this case is this: there's a strong belief that the killer was in the house before anyone went to bed. Think about that. Upstairs, in a cramped attic space, investigators later found cigarette butt evidence that someone had been sitting there in the darkness, waiting, listening to the family moving around, talking, laughing, praying, getting ready for bed. You can picture it: shoes coming off, the floorboards creaking, the last lamp being turned all the way down, the house slowly settling into silence. And then, somewhere above them, hidden in the shadows, someone was just waiting. We don't know exactly when they came out, but sometime after midnight, that person stepped into the hallway, picked up an axe that belonged to Josiah Moore, and began one of the most brutal attacks in American true crime history. The killer moved room to room while the house slept. Josiah and Sarah Moore were attacked in their bed first. Josiah's wounds were so severe that his face was unrecognizable. Everyone in that house died from blows to the head. The axe belonged to the family. It had been left in the house, like so many tools in a small town back then, because who would lock up an axe when you trust your neighbors? The children were killed next, one by one in their beds. Downstairs, the Stillinger sisters, Ina and Lena, were murdered in the guest room. One of them, likely Lena, may have woken up. Her body position suggested she might have seen the attacker, or at least realized something was wrong. There are hints of a struggle around her, the kind of subtle chaos that happens when someone wakes up to a nightmare and doesn't have time to even process it. There were no gunshots, no screaming heard by the neighbors, just the quiet thud of an axe in the middle of the night. When it was over, 8 people were dead, and the killer wasn't done with the scene yet. What makes this case feel especially unsettling are the details left behind, because this wasn't just violence, it was a ritual. It was deliberate, it was weird. Around the house, several mirrors in the home and glass surfaces were covered, some with clothing, some with cloth. Curtains were drawn, a lamp had its chimney removed, and the wick turned way down, like the killer wanted just enough light to see, but not enough to be seen from the outside. Clothing or bed covers were pulled over many of the victims' faces, as if the killer couldn't or wouldn't look at them. In the Stillinger girls' room, there were signs that someone had arranged things in a way that made investigators wonder if the scene had been staged, possibly to imply a sexual motive. But officials and the official findings never confirmed an assault. There was also food left out in the kitchen, suggesting the murderer might have sat down to eat after the killing. Imagine that. Someone calmly having a meal in a house full of bodies. And then, when they were done, they left the axe in the guest room, leaned up, or left nearby, like a full stop at the end of a horrific scene. And then they vanished. No one saw them leave. The next morning, on June 10th, the town started its day like normal. The sun came up, roosters crowed, people opened their shops, but one person noticed something was off. A neighbor, Mary Peckham. She realized that the Moore's house was unusually quiet. No kids outside doing chores, no one moving around. The chickens weren't out. And in a small town, you know your neighbors, you know their routines. And this was wrong. Mary tried the door. It was locked. So she called Josiah's brother, Ross, who had a key. He showed up, probably irritated at first, thinking maybe the family had overslept. Ross unlocked the door and stepped inside and walked into the downstairs guest room. And what he saw there made him back out immediately and tell Mary to call the authorities. Inside that room were the bodies of Ina and Lena Stillinger. When police and locals started to search the rest of the house, they found the Moores, Josiah, Sarah, and their 4 children dead upstairs. And then chaos. A ruined crime scene. This is 1912. There's no concept of modern forensics like we have today. No DNA testing, no preservation of trace evidence. And in a small town, news travels faster than any official system. As word spread about what had happened inside that house, people started showing up. Not just law enforcement, not just doctors, townsfolk, curious neighbors, locals who had heard the gossip and wanted to see that for themselves. They walked through the rooms, they touched things, they moved items. Some reports saying that people even took pieces of the Moore's home as a morbid souvenir. The crime scene, if you can even call it that at this point, was contaminated almost instantly. Any decent chance of solving this case with physical evidence got trampled under the boots of dozens of horrified, curious people. So, if you're wondering why this case is still unsolved more than a century later, this is a big part of the answer. Despite the damage, the case didn't just fizzle, it exploded. 8 people were murdered in their beds in a small Midwestern town. That was huge news in 1912. Reporters descended on Villisca. The story spread nationwide. People were terrified and they wanted answers. Multiple suspects came under scrutiny over the years. Theories ranged from the plausible to the downright bizarre. One of the most talked about suspects was a traveling minister who had preached in town around the same time of the murders. His behavior and statements after the crime raised eyebrows, and he was eventually tried, not once, but twice. One trial ended in a hung jury, the second ended in an acquittal. Another suspect was a man named William Mansfield, who some investigators believed was a kind of roaming killer, possibly connected to other axe murders in the Midwest. There were attempts to link Villisca to a larger pattern, a shadow figure riding trains, slipping into towns, and leaving a string of near identical crimes in his wake. But here's the thing, none of it ever stuck. No one was ever convicted. No confession sealed the story. Every promising lead seemed to end in uncertainty. And so, the Villisca joined the small, chilling group of cases where the brutality of the crime is matched only by the mystery around it. Let's sit with this for a second. 8 people killed in a single house, a small town full of potential witnesses, rumors, and suspects, national attention, multiple trials, private detectives, years of speculation, and still no evidence or answer. That's the part of what makes this case feel so eerie, even more than a century later. There's no neat ending, no, and then they caught the guy. Just a void. You're left with questions like, did the killer know the Moors personally? Was this a random attack by a stranger passing through on the railroad? Was there a bigger pattern of axe murders in that era that we still don't fully grasp? And then the big one, did someone in Villisca quietly know the truth and just never talk about it? In a town that small, secrets have a way of leaking out over time. But in this case, if anyone knew, they literally took it to the grave. Now, if you're into haunted locations, this is where Villisca steps into a completely different realm, the paranormal. The Moore House still stands in Villisca today, and it's been restored to look as close to as its 1912 appearance as possible. No modern comforts, no big renovations, just a preserved, frozen in time version of the night everything changed. And you can tour it. You can stay overnight. People who do often report strange experiences like footsteps, children voices, doors moving, objects shifting, feelings of dread in certain rooms. Some groups claim to capture EVPs, disembodied voices recorded on audio devices. Others just talk about the overwhelming emotional weight they feel walking into those bedrooms. Now, whether you believe in hauntings or not, spending a night in the exact house where 8 people were murdered with an axe, in the dark with that same history, being in your head, that's going to mess with you a little. So, why does this particular case still hook people over 100 years later? I think it comes down to a few things. It violates the most basic sense of safety, your home, your bed, your family. There are just enough clues to paint a vivid picture, but not enough to solve the mystery. The details are deeply weird: covered mirrors, staged scenes, the killer eating in the house afterwards, and the story lives on in a physical place that you could still visit. You could stand in those rooms, see where the beds were, and imagine that night. It feels personal in a way. Some old crime scenes don't. These weren't mobsters or gang rivals or even outlaws. This was a family, kids, two girls who were just having a sleepover. The Villisca Axe murders sit right at the intersection of true crime and the unexplained. We know what happened, but not who did it or even why. And that gap between what we can prove and what we can't, that's where the unease lives. That's where the weird creeps in. So, was a Villisca killer a stranger passing through on the rails, a local with a dark secret, part of some larger hidden pattern of axe murder spread across the Midwest? We don't know. What we have are fragments: a quiet town, a house on a residential street, a hidden attic, an axe, and 8 lives cut short in the middle of the night. And over a century later, that house still stands, waiting, in a sense, for an answer that may never come. You've been watching The Weird and Unexplained with John. Thanks for watching.